Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Book Trek 2024, the Summer of Trek, the Wrath of the Summer of Trek. This is a BookTube event created by Vin at Revenant Reads. He's assembled a great bridge crew of other BookTubers designed to read Star Trek all summer long. Star Trek fiction. Star Trek, as a franchise of TV shows, is indelibly intertwined with summer for Vin and for me as well. I imagine for a lot of people. For a number of different reasons. For me, it's one particular reason. It's Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, which is indelibly intertwined with summer for me because I watched it all summer long in the movie theaters. But it's a great loose form event. If you read a Star Trek novel or short story in this summer, you have participated in Summer of Trek. We also have a couple of away missions that are nonfiction. One is to read a nonfiction work by a Star Trek person, a memoir or a history of the show. And the other is to read a work of science, a popular work of science, at any point during the summer. I will certainly be doing that anyway. But I'm sticking to Star Trek novels. And my Book Trek 2024 has got off to a little bit of a weird start. Not a bad one, but a little bit of a weird start in that the first two books I picked ended up being short stories. They ended up not being novels at all. So with this one, the one that I read last night, I double and triple checked. I've already read this thing, though. So I knew what I was getting into. I knew that it was a novel. It's by Greg Cox, who doesn't usually please me much as a Star Trek writer. And it's Foul Deeds Will Rise. And as important as the plot of this book is the setting of this book, the time frame of this book. Because as I've mentioned many times before on Book Trek, in Star Trek, time is an element. And I don't mean wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey. I don't mean time paradoxes or time travel. I mean the simple passage of time. We follow our characters through decades of their lives and careers. That's a big thing. There aren't many science fiction franchises where that's true. It's a huge reservoir of potential. Unfortunately, almost always untapped. This book, for instance, takes place a long time after the original series. At least 20 years after the original series. This takes place, I think, right after Star Trek: The Undiscovered Country, the much despised big screen Star Trek movie directed by William Shatner, in which we learn that Mr. Spock has a half-brother, Sybok. This was before we learned that both Spock and Sybok were completely outdone and taught how to be Vulcans and how to be people and how to be readers and how to be scientists by their sister, Michael Burnham, Space Jesus, who wasn't even Vulcan at all, yet easily outdid them in every single way. This was before, and I'd like to think not involved. I'd like to think these are two separate continuities. When I'm reading Star Trek, I'm not reading Star Trek that contains Michael Burnham. but this was written before the savage desecration of Star Trek Discovery had been perpetrated on long-suffering Star Trek fans. That did not exist yet. This takes place right then. This takes place, the Enterprise A is the starship here. And that area is unexamined, almost completely unexamined. This is a weird crew. Spock has been a captain. Kirk has been an admiral. We mentioned before that the idea that in Star Trek: The Next Generation, Picard is holding Riker back. With Riker's full cooperation, Riker could have a command of his own, but he wants to work with Jean-Luc Picard, so he sticks around. He holds on. The same is true with Kirk's original crew. They've saved the Earth multiple times. All of them have, working together. They could have commands of their own or prestigious positions at the Academy or whatnot. Instead, they're his bridge crew again on the Enterprise A. It's our great crew on their last starship together. And yet we have maybe two episodes or two adventures. Not 200, maybe two. We have no idea how they fill their time. We have no idea how that cruise works, how long it goes on, what they encounter, when it ends, and how it ends. I realize that part of that is nebulous because all of this is determined by what's on the big screen. What's canon for Star Trek is on the big screen or the little screen. It's not on the books. But still, you don't have to know any of those things to write these characters different than you would their earlier counterparts. And Greg Cox doesn't do that in this book. He does something that I'm sure he thought was close enough. This is the story of the Enterprise A under now Captain demoted Admiral Kirk, Captain Spock, Scotty in engineering, Uhura on the bridge, Sulu, Chekhov. And they are, or rather, Chekhov, they are doing a standard Star Trek thing. There are these two barely warped civilizations. They aren't members of the Federation, but they want the Federation to mediate dispute between them. The Enterprise is sent as a huge gesture on the part of the Federation. This will keep the peace. This will guarantee that everyone's on their best behavior and that everyone's honest. The diplomats come on board. Of course, they're murdered. There's murder on board. That happens right away. That's not a spoiler. And there is an added element to Kirk trying to figure out what's going on. Spock and Scotty are off vessel. They're on an away mission of their own. But Chekhov is head of security, and Dr. McCoy is right there helping with forensic crime detection. Keep in mind, this is a 23rd century. You already know this if you know the few crime-busting episodes of, for instance, Voyager. This appears to be a 23rd century in which the science of fingerprinting is not known. where you can't check anything for fingerprints. You can check for DNA samples or holographic heat emissions, but not fingerprints. There's a murder mystery episode of Voyager that would be solved by Angela Lansbury in far less time than it's solved by Lieutenant Commander Tuvok, because she would check fingerprints with the sheriff. But in addition to that, there's another figure involved in this storyline. Her name is Lenore Caridian. And old-time Star Trek fans will recognize that name. There was an original Star Trek episode called The Conscience of the King. The Caridian players, they are Shakespeare crew. They go from ship to ship, from station to station. They're a freelance itinerant Shakespeare crew to entertain the crew in an era before holosuites. And they come on board the Enterprise, and people start to die on board the Enterprise. That people have died in the wake of the Caridian crew. Anton Caridian strikes a horrifyingly familiar note for Jim Kirk. And in The Conscience of the King, we learned something about Jim Kirk, the captain, the young captain of the Enterprise. NCC 1701, no bloody A, B, C, or D. The original NCC 1701. We learned something about Kirk in that episode, which is that when he was much younger, he was on a planet called Tarsus 4 that had a famine. And the governor of Tarsus 4, a man named Kodos, decided to kill a gigantic percentage of the population so that the food stores they had would last for the rest of the population until help arrived. And right after he did those mass executions, which Kirk saw, that young Jim Kirk not only saw those executions, but he saw Kodos' face. Right after those executions, supply ships showed up. And Kodos, the executioner, went down in Federation history as one of the worst villains of all time. And his body was never found. After a little while, with the Caridian players on board, Kirk starts to wonder if Anton Caridian is Kodos, the executioner, as he went down in history as Kodos, the executioner. He starts to wonder if this is true. And while he's wondering that, Anton Caridian's crazy daughter, Lenore, is falling in love with Captain Kirk. She's nuts. She's as crazy as a bag of squirrels. And I won't spoil the episode in case you haven't seen it. The episode is well worth seeing. The scenes between Spock, McCoy, and Kirk are premium. There's a lot of hammy overacting everywhere else, but the scenes between those three are incredibly good in Conscience of the King. And Lenore's back in this book. She has somehow convinced people that she is rehabilitated. So she is back in the action in this book. Now that is, Cox knows exactly what he's doing here. He knows perfectly well that if he puts her in the mix, everyone is going to suspect that it's her, that the killer is her. But he adds one more familiar face from the original show, a character who's in just a couple of episodes. Kevin Riley, a young crewman on board the Enterprise, a jokester, a boyish type figure. He's in The Naked Time. He has wonderful comic relief in The Naked Time. And he's also in The Conscience of the King. As someone who might be a target, certainly is inadvertently targeted by the killer on board the Enterprise. and only barely survives by drinking milk. It certainly looks like milk. Let that be a lesson to you. I know that this is falling on deaf ears for all of you out there, but from an outsider, allow me to point out how unbelievably weird and gross it is that humans drink cow milk. So anyway, we'll go down that path. We'll try to stay on focus. There's a murder mystery on board the ship. And there's a murder mystery involving this diplomatic mission as well that also is being addressed by Scotty and Spock separately. Cox does all this really well. And oh my God, does he reference the original series episodes. You'd think that this book would be loaded with reference to The Conscience of the King, but it's loaded with references to everything. Just everything. And I'm not 100% sure how well done they are. This is a weird instance where I actually don't know how well done they are for the first-time reader who doesn't know the original series backwards and forwards. I can't unsee those episodes. I can't unknow them. They are part of my DNA. I know the original episodes backwards and forwards. I eat, sleep, and breathe them, and I have for my whole life. Almost my whole life. So I encountered them at just the right time and have never stopped loving them. But more than loving them, I know them. I know their details. And so when Greg Cox is alluding to one original series episode after another, barely lets it go for a page, I can't tell whether or not he's contextualizing things so that a new reader would even know what he's talking about. I honestly can't tell. I'd be interested to know what a reader who does not know the original series at all would make of this book. It's possible that if Greg Cox is botching all of those callbacks, then this will be largely incomprehensible. Certainly the murder mysteries are not interesting enough to carry this book on its own. And you might think, well, okay, if the characters are constantly talking about their past adventures, then why are you complaining about the fact that this is unmined territory? That's why I'm complaining. Because these characters are not Star Trek fans. They lived those adventures and presumably have lived lots of other things as well. These are people who have been colleagues and co-workers in continuity in this storyline at least 30 years. They are by far the most experienced Star Trek bridge crew in all of Starfleet, maybe in all of Starfleet history. They shouldn't act together the way they do. They shouldn't. It shouldn't feel this way. These should be, in some way, new characters. There should be all kinds of dynamics that take a long time for, let's be honest here, a more skilled writer to tease out. So once again, Foul Deeds Will Arise gives me an occasion to repeat a call that I did a few times last summer of Trek. Where is my Star Trek workplace novel? Where is that novel? Where is the workplace that isn't a Star Trek novel? I want a Star Trek novel that's not a Star Trek novel. I want a Star Trek novel that writes about these characters as people and professionals and department heads and co-workers, instead of a collection of original series one-liners and callbacks. I want that. I don't know if I'm making it clear, but I want that. I want that. And my wanting that was increased 1,000-fold by a recent reread I did on this channel of Nicholas Montserrat's novel, The Cruel Sea. Where is the Enterprise novel like that? I'm not saying that you can just whistle and call up a writer as good as Nicholas Montserrat, but they're out there. And like I said, this continuity is not being used by anyone. No one's coming back to this continuity. There are only 2 members of the original crew left. 3 members of the original crew left. We can't have anyone revisiting the Enterprise A. Unless AI were to do it. There's no way that it could be done. But if you could do it, let's leave out Star Trek The Undiscovered Country, shall we? This crew should be different. They should feel different than they do in this book. This book, they feel like the versions of these characters in the original series only artificially aged. Like in that episode in the original series where they artificially aged. That's what it feels like. It feels like they haven't changed or grown or deepened in all that time. They're just older. That's all. It ended up frustrating me. Of course, the murder mystery is nothing to write home about. None of the plot wrinkles in here are anything to write home about. In fact, they're so obviously lazy that I really got the impression that, Greg Cox he's not my favorite Star Trek novelist, but he's not inept. I have a feeling that the reason that the plots in here are so pro forma is because the main point of the book is the member berries, is the callbacks to the original show. And I don't mind that. But I want the Enterprise A's crew. This amazing crew that should not exist in a million years. The chances that a commanding officer would get one of his bridge crew to forego promotions when promotions aren't just falling off trees, the chances they would get one of them to do it, if it's a fanatically loyal Vulcan, sure. The chances they would get all of them to do it, except Sulu, virtually nil. What would that be like? That's a story on its own. I don't know. I'm sure that someone could write an Enterprise A adventure story that totally upstages all of those background questions for me, because those are pressing background questions for me. What is this crew like? I'm not stupid enough to think that they're the same as the crew, that they're like the crew that I loved in the 1960s. I don't believe that. I wouldn't want it to be true. It wouldn't ever be true. Maybe there's an author who can write characters at this age like that. In fact, Diane Carey, I think, does in Wagon Train to the Stars. That's roughly the Enterprise A here. And there you very much get the impression that these characters are living parts of each other. They don't even need to speak. There's a great scene in Wagon Train to the Stars by Diane Carey where the bridge crew of the Enterprise handles an emergency in the convoy that they're shepherding without any words and without the civilians on board on the bridge even knowing that there was an emergency. They all handle it just without any words at all. They know each other that well. I want more novels like that. If I'm going to get the Enterprise A crew at all, I want more novels like that. And considering that the Enterprise A adventures are unchronicled, I do want more adventures like that. So my Book Trek book this time around is not a 4-star read, not really a slam bang event. But I'm going to chuck another book on the pile for tonight for our Book Trek, so we will see what the next one happens. We'll see whether or not we turn up any gold next time. I read this the first time and was largely disappointed for it. I read it. My read last night was a reread. There were bits that I liked more. Some of the nostalgia is well done. I want my Star Trek workplace novel. I want a Star Trek novel that isn't a Star Trek novel. There's no reason not to do it now. I could understand why I wasn't getting that in the 1980s. But there's no reason not to do it now. Anyway, I'll try not to hit this note all summer long, or you'll put your phasers on kill, point them at me, and you'll be justified in doing so. You'll all become little Kodos the Executioners. So I'll wrap this up for now. We'll see how we do next time. Thank you, BookTube.